I went to my then unit head and said, I want to teach this course on small business, and I want Royce to come join me. And he looked at me and he said, you know, we have workload standards, and there's going to be no student at the Harvard Business School who wants to take that class.
Wow.
So you do understand that, you know, you've been here long enough so that we'll give you rope to do whatever you want, but eventually you're going to have to give that up and go back and probably teach in the first year because you got to meet productivity requirements. And I said, well, I'm willing to take that risk. We had, what did we have, 17 students in our first class?
Yes.
And what happens is, don't tell the fire marshals this, but we have people who sit in for a week or two in the plastic seats in the back, waiting for somebody to drop out for whatever reason. And if anybody drops the class, they go out to the registrar and say, hey, I've been attending the class for the last 2 weeks. I know I'm beyond ad drop. Can I get in? So it's quite remarkable. And we've done that. You know, we've had a little bit more than 3,300 students in our fall course and about 1,100 students in our spring course. So we're teaching a lot.
Both Rick and I, after careful examination, feel that entrepreneurship through acquisition is dramatically different from entrepreneurship through startup with respect to risk. And the reason that is because when you buy a small firm, you're buying a company that has been around for 10, 20, 30 years. You can look at its historic financials and see what its revenues are, its profits. It has a team of people that know how to do the work. It has a collection of satisfied customers. You can measure their pattern of recurringly buying the company's product. And so you know a great deal about the business, not only how it operates, but how stable and predictable it is. And this is just a complete world of difference from starting a business up where you know almost none of those facts. And so even though they're both linked together as entrepreneurship, this type of entrepreneurship, while it's surely not without risk, is dramatically lower risk than starting a small business.
You know, those people who get a lot of social value out of their careers, you know, they want to be able to meet interesting coworkers. Maybe they're single and they're interested in having a life mate, and they're going to find that by somebody who they're going to meet through a work experience. Those combinations of people probably are not terrific, at least when they're coming right out of school, for this path. But if you tend to get your social interests elsewhere, you know, you play baseball, you belong to a church, whatever it is, you know, your social, your work can be separate from your social. For those people, this is a great path. So it's, and you know, we have looked over the years whether particular backgrounds are more likely to be both do this path and succeed in this path. And we have found, you know, the numbers are always small, but we have found no meaningful correlation. We have a lot of our students have military backgrounds and they're very successful here. A lot of our students have engineering backgrounds and they're very successful. A lot of our students have financial services backgrounds. They're very successful. Hard to find a bucket of students that don't succeed.
People who are drawn to entrepreneurship through acquisition are drawn by that challenge of being a manager, managing people and creating marketing strategies and overseeing product. They are less focused on what the particular product or service is. They're a little bit more agnostic and more interested in managing. And that can be a dividing line between people who choose startup and people who choose entrepreneurship through acquisition.
Right. To use your analogy, most people, I'm just guessing, most people who start bakeries are really good at baking.
Yes. Yes.
And are fascinated by the idea of, you know, cutting up apples and how to make the right crust and making that delicious apple pie. And they may not have that skill at actually making the pie in a cost-effective way and pricing it properly and distributing it properly and alike. and marketing it properly. So those are the skills that are often required to take that bakery to the next level. This is a lot easier. You buy a business that people have proven that it has an effective model. You can improve the model, but it begins with a starting point where you know that the company under its previous management can produce the product and sell the product at a profit. So it's delighting its customers.
That baker, to keep using this analogy, that knowledge of baking was hugely important when he or she started the business. 20 years later, when they have 35 people in the plant, that person has become a manager. They're not baking pies anymore. They're dealing with payroll and staffing and regulation and customers. And so maybe what the business really needs is someone who's been trained as a manager, not trained as a baker. And the second thing is that person who founded the company has been really successful, and now at age 65, they have more money than time, and they're acting accordingly, and they don't want to work on Fridays to figure out how to expand into a neighboring territory. But that hungry young entrepreneur, they're willing to work on Fridays and Saturdays to figure out how to expand the territory. And
Yeah.
those are catalysts. One of the reasons we see so much success in this.
I don't know anybody who works 40 hours a week. I am waiting for the person who is 40 years old, successful, and hanging out in the ski slope or the beach or the golf course or the weight room. I admire those people deeply, but I don't think they really exist because I think it's always a lot of hard work. It is not the case that if you have a business with lots of recurring revenue, that you can go hang out on the beach, because the reason you have that recurring revenue is because you have some kind of barrier. And usually that barrier is that the company delivers their service really, really well. And that as soon as customers get unhappy with the service, they're going to move on. We often hear stories where sellers say, I'm unhappy with the price I can sell my business for. I've been getting $1 million of cash flow out of my business a year, in which I'm working 60 or 70 hours a week on. I'm going to take my number two, who I'm paying $75 or $80 or $100,000 a year, and I'm going to make them CEO, and I'm going to move to Florida, wherever they go to retire. And what they see is that their $1 million business very quickly becomes a $500,000 business, and very quickly becomes a $200,000 business, and then it's really not saleable because it's had 3 bad years. It really does take the energy and creativity of an entrepreneur, of a CEO, to keep the business successful.
Yeah, it's an important thing to remember about small companies is good small companies aren't small because no one wants to buy their product or because their customers keep getting snatched away by competitors. Good small companies are small because the market niche they focus on is small. But within that niche, they are devastating, effective competitors where for some reason or another, customers are reluctant to switch. They see value in sticking to this supplier and perhaps there are costs to switching. And so you can have a great business that's still a small business. I think one of the early moments of realization for Rick and me was a trip we took to Dallas-Fort Worth in the early years of our teaching, and we met these 2 sisters who were selling their business. It was a high-rise window washing business, and they were taking down about $2.5 million a year, which they split between them, year in and year out, serving these highly recurring tall businesses, operating out of a sort of inconspicuous warehouse in Dallas-Fort Worth. And we kind of looked at each other and said,
with plywood paneling, plywood
paneling. They were wonderful, scrappy entrepreneurs who had basically didn't want to work anymore, didn't want to work hard after a long career. And what just struck us is, my God, here's this sort of obscure small company out of many possible industries in one city, out of many possible cities. Do you realize how many opportunities must abound?
And note how much money they were making.
Yeah, note that.
Every time somebody comes to do a service, or every time I go into a shop, or I don't go to very many shops, so this is not a big problem, but it's mainly the service people. I want to engage in a conversation of like, how does their business model work?
Yeah, yeah.
How does this work? So just a couple weeks ago, somebody knocked on my door and said, "Hey, I see you have apple trees. Would you like us to start taking care of your apple trees?" And, revealing perhaps too much about myself, but I hate heights. And I also hate failure. And I've had these apple trees for about 15 years, and they've grown so that I now have to deal with heights, and they almost never produce apples. And I will add it's in a part of the world where there are lots of bears. And so the bears, once I finally do get apples, I go to sleep at night and wake up in the morning, and the bears have destroyed my apple trees. And it's like so much frustration. So I hire these guys, and then I can't help but wonder, so what is this? Is this, how many people are in this? And how many people, how come they have two schedulers? So I can call to schedule the appointment, and there somebody else is in. How come that work? And it seems like it says that it's one of, such and such company, like it's part of a funeral home, it's like a roll-up. And so, could you do an apple tree maintenance roll-up? How could that possibly be possible? And I spend hours and hours and hours, and my wife is always, "Rick, would you just let them do their job?"
The actual buying from a seller is a challenging experience and hard work, and there are at least two reasons for it. One is almost every seller you deal with is a first-time seller. So they're embarking on a intricate transaction, and of something that's very important to them for all the reasons you've said, plus their family wealth is concentrated there, and they've never done it before, including never picked the advisors like lawyers and accountants that they need. So there's that. You have to sort of help them through the process. But the second piece is, do they really want to sell? And, Rick likes to say that finding a committed seller is actually harder than finding a great small business. And I think that's really true. That part of your early diligence when you're looking at the company is not just the numbers or sales recurring, does it have any customer concentration, those sort of hard skill assessments, but making sure that you understand, does this seller have a compelling motivation to sell now? So what are some of those? They're getting older and they really want to move to a retirement community. They don't have a natural successor inside the firm. They don't have partners where they have to get alignment of 3 or 4 people on selling. There are a bunch of clues that you can look at that say, yes, this seller probably doesn't have to sell, but they have a strong propensity to sell. By the way, hiring a broker is a good clue on that too, particularly if the broker charges a retainer and not just a success-based fee. So there are a set of clues you should be looking at early on to determine, to borrow Rick's words, is this a committed seller?
What would you tell your high school or early college self?
Exercise more.
Rick.
It's going to be so much easier at 18 than it is at 71.
Fair.
Adam, that's a very provocative question you're asking, because what you can't possibly know is that both one of Rick's sons and my son both have elected to become entrepreneurs through acquisition without any solicitation on our parts at all. And so the idea of giving a young person advice is not only our profession, but is very personal. I think I would say that, if you're a capable person, this field is definitely accessible to you. You can do what the people who are running small firms does. It takes grit and energy, and you have to hang in there even, when you get bad news along the way, but it is definitely achievable. And if you have a taste for professional independence and making decisions and having a lot of control over your life and potentially building significant wealth, this is a path you should examine very carefully. It might not be right for you, but it definitely merits examination.
A simpler way of saying that is I would tell my 18-year-old self to hang out with some 40-year-olds and see how happy they are in their jobs. and their careers and their families, and have dinner with them and their families. And one of the things I think they're going to discover is the 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds who own small business are a lot happier than the 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds who've taken virtually any other profession.
Wow.